Thank you for joining I Be There.
Walter, we've been having conversations about creative for a couple of years. Funny thing is, I didn't realize how many things we share in common. You and I both started out our careers in web content production. That was when the days, if you knew how to build a website, you'd get a gig. We both worked at
aging ourselves now.
I know, but you got to know where you came from to know where you're going. So this is why this is important. And then we overlapped a little bit at DoubleClick. I went off to product marketing, and then you headed full steam into actual production of products. And you worked in product development at MTV Networks, MySpace. Remember that before the days of Facebook? You also worked at the powerhouse of interactive ad formats, PointRoll. And unlike me, you actually invented stuff. And you hold 6 patents for things like the famous peelback ad and even sequential video ads. And I know folks here on the phone know you also have the funniest bio in Clubhouse, which reads, "Many of the ads you hate, I invented. Sorry." So now, not many of us will admit that we love advertising, but I actually do, along with Nina Munoz, my partner in crime on the Media Center. But let's kick this off by you sharing kind of what your journey was like as a problem solver and storyteller. And how would you characterize the evolution of content as you started out in web and have moved now to all things media?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny too, because I think with the upcoming, release of iOS 14.5, like we're going to see a little bit of a kickback to 99, 2000, right? And what I mean by that is like, the beginning of this time, this space, right? When people were like, what is rich media? And I was literally like the first rich media hire for the New York Times when like Flash was becoming a thing. It was like, we can make sites in a 300 by 250 with this thing called Flash and using action scripts. We were at a time when it was about like, how can we just be as intrusive as fuck, right? To get in front of someone and get them engaged, to get them to see a brand. And over time, what's been interesting is to see the kind of pushback in advertising in this kind of, this overlapping of data. And now data has allowed us to truly personalize these experiences, which allowed us to minimize the intrusiveness. But it's really become a space of like, how do we, allow a brand to deliver a message to someone in a moment that actually matters most and at a time that's highly relevant, really giving them something in exchange for their time spent. It's, while I believe it's gone to a better place, I think that intrusiveness now today isn't what it was before. Before it was like, stop giving me these pop-ups, stop floating over my content. Now it's stop following me everywhere, stop telling me to go back and buy this, and stop listening to my microphone and listening in on my conversations. So it's gotten to a point where it's intrusiveness is about like personalization, which I think is unfortunate to some degree. And if research, tells you, and I've done a ton of white papers that shows that like younger individuals and millennials and Gen Z, like they're actually okay with the use of that data, right? They're okay with that because they know that they're getting something in return for what they're giving to these apps, right? And if you're going onto these apps and these sites and it's free, right, there needs to be some form of transaction. But when we see things like iOS 14.5 coming, it really starts to get interesting, because without the use of third-party data and what's become like the crux of all of advertising, right? Then now, how do we reach people in ways that are going to be highly engaging? So I think that we're going to see a tremendous burst in innovation and what innovation means.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. Apple is a company that's all about, the elegance and of the user experience. And what really, when advertising works well, it is about not over frequencying, overplaying your hand as a marketer, but getting it right, with people. So what have you learned? We could talk forever about this, but what have you learned? I know, you mentioned personalization and data, but as one whose goal is to create experiences for brands, what takeaways have you kind of gained in understanding people's moods, their intent, and even who they are in terms of identity?
I think the biggest learning curve I had is when I was at Viacom. So Viacom was interesting because I think that as an industry, we all do the same thing, right? We all make the same mistake. RFP comes in, multi-million-dollar opportunity. They want something inventive. We basically throw shit at a wall and hope it sticks, right? So, there I was like, a few of us thought, well, what if we actually could test the shit before we throw it on a wall, right? Like truly see that this is going to be work. So we ended up teaming up with MIT Labs, and what we did with MIT Labs is we built out the first biometric usability lab. So within this lab, it literally looked like someone was in the ICU. We had gear on their head, on their hands, vests, and so on and so forth. We were pulling things like pupil dilation, which is when the eyes kind of go up and down. We were pulling heart rate, arousal, which sounds really weird. Research people have really weird names for shit. Arousal is actually sweat on your palms, right? I first heard that and I was like, we're measuring what? It's whether you're leaning back or forward. And through this, what we were essentially able to do is understand the emotional state of an individual when they engaged and interacted with an ad, right? So it was more of the cognitive approach to learning why they like the things they like by understanding things like color, call to action, speed of animation, position on page. All of this essentially allowed me to rethink the way I approach advertising. Right. So that was, that provided me with the ability to really kind of learn and go above and beyond, which it's funny because that was my first introduction into experience design and what experience design really means and is, right? I didn't know that until 2 or 3, 4 years ago that was like the crux to kind of where I'm at now. But I think that as a whole, the thing that we lack in this space in terms of creating like highly engaging opportunities is really the use of data and formats together, right? Because when I say, innovation isn't necessarily just doing something completely new or reinventing the wheel, it's making subtle approaches to things. It is like understanding that we scroll on an average of 76 feet per day, right? That's the length of a 16-wheeler tractor trailer, right? That's 5.2 miles a year. Right. So if you understand this, then how can we build opportunities that are engaging around the way we're actually interacting and consuming content?
Well, this is the perfect pivot because I want to bring in Carmen now. Carmen, you came to us at IB 4 years ago as an intern with a background in film. And now fast forward to today, you manage publisher relations at EMX Digital. And in a way, if you think about this, Walter just mentioned the relationship of content to ad, and what EMX Digital and what you're doing is bringing automation to that process through programmatic. Can you talk about your role in working with publishers and share a little bit about like how you're viewed towards the role of video as a creator and how you brought that to your gig?
Yeah, definitely. To give a little bit of context, Engine Media Exchange EMX is an end-to-end technology platform. It's a programmatic solution that includes Exchange, a data platform for our buyers, and also a trading desk for our managed demand from our agency. And my role specifically is in publisher account management. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm helping them troubleshoot issues and I'm driving revenue for their inventory. But because I was a film student and a filmmaker for 7 years before I got into advertising, I have a really holistic understanding of the importance of content and also why delivering qualified, relevant content, advertising is so important. So I work really closely with our operations team to curate PMPs. And for many of the publishers I work with, one of the main ways that we make sure that the KPIs are met for the advertisers is by matching the appropriate audience to the brand. So also my experience before ad tech definitely helps me see trends when I'm analyzing performance for my publishers. And when I do see these trends, I can service them to the people who can make those things happen, make those PMPs happen, and connect those advertisers to the right brands.
Yeah. So for folks on who are listening and watching that might not be into our lingo, PMP, it's a private marketplace. And so what's really interesting, I live and breathe the connected TV space every day. And, when we think about automation in this new version of television, getting it right with the most premium of long form content is critical, right? It's a publisher's gold, and they really want to make sure that that add to the content experience is right. What's some of the, counsel that you're giving to publishers on making sure that relationship of their audience to the ad is a quality experience in CTV?
So personally, I'm not a cord cutter. I've never had a traditional TV setup, and I can't really imagine a world where people aren't on the same page as I am in terms of how connected I am to the CTV space. So in terms of making sure that we're connecting our publishers with the right advertisers, it's really, we've seen a huge shift in budgets recently from linear to CTV. So it's becoming less and less of an issue over time. For the most part, what I've been hearing is lack of standardization when it comes to metadata being passed and how buyers are able to ingest and target it. But that is something that everyone is working on together as an industry, and we're definitely seeing major changes there. And I think that this is going to continue to grow. Right now, we're already seeing 750 million requests daily from direct publishers. So we have a lot of inventory, and a lot of traditional linear budgets are shifting. So it's just going to continue to grow. It's the future.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a way, that personalization that Walt, you mentioned early on, that more granular metadata is going to enable personalization through context in a whole new way. And there's more that IB is working on that front with our contextual metadata that we can talk about in a future of IB there. But I want to shift now over to Erica. So Erica Abercrombie, your gig is in a space of media that we all follow as consumers. You run influencer marketing at Nike Communications, and we've all been watching this shift of advertising to essentially where the content is people, and brands are leveraging that relationship that influencers have to a community and the opportunity to break out a brand or build a brand story through people. Can you talk about how that has evolved as a tactic? Are brands getting that opportunity to relate to communities through people that represent them?
Yeah. So I'll say this. I think influencer marketing has definitely evolved. 10 years ago, nobody really knew what it was. It definitely wasn't being taught in schools or anything like that. And up until, I would say, pre-pandemic, I found myself still really trying to convince brand marketers of the importance of influencer marketing. For me, the main importance is relevancy to a brand, right? So what I've seen, and I think other folks that are in the space can attest to as well, is when the pandemic hit, all of the marketing budget that brands had allocated towards experiential or towards out of home tactics like billboard ads and things of that sort, they reestablished where those dollars were going, right? If I'm a brand and I invested $2 million into Coachella, I can't do that anymore. So where am I going to put those dollars? So that said, a lot of those dollars were allocated towards influencer marketing. And I think in the last year, we've really been able to see a shift around the conversation of the importance of influencer marketing. And then even more so around the importance of diversity within influencer marketing. So, not just making sure that you have influential people, but that they're influential people that represent all different communities, disabilities, people of color, women, the LGBTQ community. And so I definitely think there's been quite a shift in the last year or two, but especially since the pandemic hit, for sure.
Yeah. And it seems so obvious to us, we live and breathe, the advertising space, to think that relevance, ultimately people want to see themselves in media and advertising. But, as you mentioned, the diversity of communities that influencers and creators represent, could you talk a little bit too about, how you're counseling those influencers and the brands? Because, when it comes down to it, the business model is still evolving. Pay scale and pay rates can differ tremendously, depending on if you're a person of color or representing a particular community. What are you seeing on that side in terms of the professionalization of the media and maturation of influencer?
Yeah. So before I get into pay, which I think is a really important thing that you brought up, I always say, I personally think multicultural marketing is becoming an archaic thought, right? Like this idea that you have to separate your dollars to be towards people of color or a certain group, throw that out the window. Like this is 2021, we're getting ready to go into a space, whether people want to accept it or believe it or not, people of color are going to be, the leading races in the next 20 or so years. As well as how are you affecting or how are you influencing Gen Zers, right? And young millennials who don't necessarily have loyalty to a brand yet, but are getting ready to do that. And so I say this to say on the agency to brand side, one of the things that I consult my clients in is reminding them of that. It's important to ensure that you have diversity across the folks that are promoting your brand. It's also important that you're allocating appropriate dollars to ensure that you can actually get the people that you want. Again, as I mentioned before, influencer marketing was almost like an afterthought. It was like something cool to do if we could. And now what we're seeing is brands rather, understanding that this is a core tactic from a marketing standpoint. So I think that's really important. And then in regards to counseling or working with influencers from a pay perspective, I really just think it comes down to, are you going to do the right thing, right? We all have budgets that we have to kind of stay in line with, right? Not go over, but you as the agency person or as the person who's creating these deals and securing these deals with these talent know what they should be getting paid. And so I think there's a huge responsibility on the folks that have the budget to ensure that they're paying people appropriately. It's always great when you can stay under budget, but sometimes, you got to do the right thing. Like there are people I've had who are influencers who come in way lower than they should. And so it's up to me to say, to negotiate a rate that is going to actually benefit them. So I really just think it comes down to being honest.
Yeah. And if there's anything that kind of marks this moment, I was really struck by an article, Taylor Lorenz, who writes about advertising and media for the New York Times. She came out with an article that basically highlighted that the influencer community is now essentially being represented by SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. So it's kind of astounding, right? It's the creators that are driving, and our publishers. They are the publishers and the content and the ad product, Walt, as you pointed out, in this new emerging landscape of TikTok and Insta, et cetera. It's, that professionalization is going to, I think, going to be good for, across the board for brands and for the influencers themselves. I want to fast forward and have all three of us talk about something that is also a huge trend, and that is a whole new medium that is an old medium. It's digital audio as social platform, otherwise known as Clubhouse. And Erica, Yumi, and Walt, Erica, I met you on Clubhouse.
Yes.
It's so fascinating to me because here again, the content is people and the product is conversations. And so we typically see, you know, in media, the trend is as eyeballs and audience grows, so follow the dollars. And yet, you know, for Clubhouse, there's not an ad monetization model that I can see yet. Where do you all see that going? And now you see Facebook, you know, there's going to be a lot of quick follows to Clubhouse, but maybe Walter, share what you see happening on Clubhouse from a media and advertising perspective. And Eric, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and Carmen too.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, the pivot to Clubhouse. Look, here's the thing. I mean, we all have to realize that this is not a new platform, right? This is not a new technology. This has been out, like voice like this has been out since like 98, 99. Yeah, right? Like we've all been there. Most of the older folks have been there, right? But look, here's the thing. Like I've been asked already by multiple brands about, you know, being on the platform, and my quick answer is no. I don't think it's ready as of yet. Right? The lack of data, the lack of understanding who's in a room, like all of that matters to a brand. And it's not good enough to just say, hey, we can get you a few hundred people in here or cap out at 5,000, right? So I would say that, you know, in time, yes, but right now I think the monetization there isn't necessarily for brands, but more so for the moderators and the people that are curating the content. It'll be interesting, I think, to see, you know, what that pivot looks like for a brand, because as of now, they're saying that, you know, they don't want a brand to have just like a brand, you know, accounts, right? Like, because again, like this is like a very people-centric platform where like your name is who you are and like what you represent and what you bring to the table. So it'll be interesting to see if brands use quote unquote influencers to engage in conversations that feels a little more like native advertising, right? Where if I'm talking about like, hey, you know, like a room about, you know, like mental health, right? And then I kind of talk on a particular product that helps me through my mental health. And then I change my, you know, my image in there to like the name of this brand. So I think it'll be interesting. It's one of these platforms that's still growing. So like time will tell, really.
Yeah. Erica, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say on my end, I've already started pitching it. I think it's a great avenue for brands to really be a part of the conversation. And I'm all for getting it before it becomes cool or becomes the thing that everyone's doing. And I think, you know, I have already started to see some brands involved in like on the app. One of them is Martell, who I actually used to work on that brand. So, you know, that makes sense why they would think to go that route. But to Walt's point, it's not, hey, we Martell are doing something. It's, hey, we, you know, Karen Civil is having this conversation, who is very influential within culture, who's an entrepreneur and a businesswoman with another businesswoman about certain things. And it's that it was like powered by Martell, right? So I think that there's, to Walt's point, very organic ways that brands can kind of seep in there. The other cool thing, and again, an advantage for me on the agency side is it's free. So, you know, from an aspect of how do I, you know, ensure that my brand is staying relevant and staying within culture, it's a no-brainer to be a part, to figure out a way to be a part of it. So that's my first kind of thought. You know, I have several others. We love the app. I'll say that much.
Yeah. Let me shift the conversation now to what I think is one of the most interesting lenses for creativity, and that is ourselves. I'd love to kind of explore for a minute, like what does the personal toolkit look like for growing your career, for growing your network? And if there's one thing that my kind of like takeaway from this whole conversation is think about the phases of media represented by the three of you, and what's that required in terms of agility and being able to pivot. Could you each kind of almost like a lightning round question, what advice would you give to your younger self knowing what you know now in the stage of your career. Carmen, do you want to pick that one up? Because you're the freshest in the launch of your own career in life.
Yeah, so I'm very early on in my career. I'm about 4 years in, if you count the year that I spent as an intern at the IAB. But when I think about that person and the person that I am now, while the same person, a very different mindset that I have. And when I think about that person, one of the things that I think really helped me get from there to here was my curiosity and my desire to understand how everything fits together. And that's kind of, I think, led me along this journey. I wasn't expecting any of this, but as soon as I got to the IAB, I was fascinated by the world of advertising. And I think that working in a constantly changing environment is very exciting. And my desire to kind of understand how it all works is what has served me the best, and the drive to educate myself on those topics.
Yeah. Be ever the student, as my first teacher in the space, Wendell Millard, once told me. Erica, how about you? What if you're about 10 years into your work life? What would you tell your younger Erica?
Several things, but the first one I would say is be yourself authentically. I think especially in the business world, at least back in the day, you were taught you had to think a certain way, you had to talk a certain way, you had to dress a certain way. And, I started out my career actually in the startup space. So, the CEO of my company, I'll never forget, he walked in the door with a blazer and sneakers. And that was at that time, like wild to say the least, which in other words means like very unexpected, very not business-like. And it ended up serving him well. Now everybody is wearing blazers and sneakers, right? And so I think similarly for me, culture and diversity has always been extremely important. And 10 years ago, it was not a topic of conversation. The topic of conversation was very much around like, we may or may not need that. And now people are, thirsty for that type of knowledge and that type of expertise. Really just comes down to like knowing who you are and kind of staying true to that. So that would be one of the things I would share with myself.
Yeah.
Yourself.
Beautiful. Walt, you were both dads of daughters.
Yeah.
So maybe you're thinking about your daughter as you answer this question for yourself. What counsel would you give to someone coming up, like your own daughter, as she becomes?
Yeah, I think there's three, and I'll be real quick on all three. Erica lightly touched on one of those. It's confidence, right? It is showing up in a room as your natural self, right? And I say this all the time, like when we pivot to the whole conversation of code switching and what that means, like I don't know that people realize how fucking exhausting it is. Like imagine like acting like someone else like 40 hours of your week forever, right? It takes a lot of energy. So number one is confidence, showing up as your natural self and being you and who you are. Number two, I'd say, is craft the story, own the story, learn how to tell the story. Because in a world of creatives, the more senior you get, the less hands-on work you do, the more selling you do, right? And I think in majority of jobs, like you have to be a good speaker, you have to know how to, inspire individuals, and you have to know how to be able to stand on stage and really own a stage and own an audience. And the third final one I'll say is I think we don't take the time for our own mental health, right? So find times and find the opportunity, especially now within this pandemic and being home, find, the time to have your own space and be in your own kind of, place. I do that like 2.5 hours every night from like 9:30 to like 11:30, 12. And that's when I just go downstairs and exercise and watch TV while I exercise or be on Clubhouse, right? So I think those three are big ones for sure.
Awesome. Well, yeah, so important to not only like bring your game, bring who you are, but also recharge. And anyway, this conversation has totally recharged me. I just love, that I get to talk to people like you who are all leaders in the space. And with that, thank you again, panelists, Super Trio, Erica, Carmen, Walt. Thanks again. And
Thank you.
let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
I Be There is a production of the Interactive Advertising Bureau. Our show today was produced by Connor Healy, Joe Ounce, and John Ward. My name is Eric John, and thank you so much for watching. Take care, everyone.
IAB's next big event is ALM, the annual leadership meeting running the week of March 8th. To find out more, visit www.iab.com/events.